Hello and welcome to the Mama Circle podcast with me, your host Nat. So nice to have you here. If you're returning, thank you. If you're brand new, welcome. And regardless of whether you're returning or brand new, I want to ask you a question. Hands up if you have experienced rage or anger since becoming a mom. Hands up if you've experienced that in relation to your little ones. And hands up if you've experienced anger or rage in the last month or so. And I want to speak about this today because it's something that I think so many of us feel, but so few of us speak about for so many different reasons. And I just feel like the more that we speak about these things that we feel uncomfortable sharing, the easier it will be for us to move through it, but also to help future moms to recognize that it's okay to feel whatever it is that you're feeling. So I had a really recent example of this with Jackson. He was doing something, I can't really remember exactly what it was, but we were in my bedroom and he was doing something that was kind of like borderline dangerous. And I remember just, telling him, Jay, don't do that, it's dangerous. And then going through all of the kind of tips and tricks that I have to try and get my almost 3-year-old to cooperate. So, explaining why I'm asking him to stop doing what he's doing, kind of telling him that it makes me feel uncomfortable or I get scared when I see little boys doing X, Y, Z. All of these things that work in different ways, none of it worked at all. All the scripts, all the tips, all the humor and play and trying to be playful, nothing worked. It became a point of principle and I got angry. And I shouted at him and I picked him up and I took him out of my room and I put him in his room. And he cried. And, he, I don't know if it's just a toddler thing, but they are extremely dramatic, or my son is extremely dramatic when he cries. Sometimes his lips turn blue and he just, he really it's this big, powerful outburst. So we've got two angry people feeling these hot emotions. And, he calmed down. I told him why I put him in his room and we kind of did our repair thing, which I'll speak about in a little while. The thing that struck me afterwards wasn't the fact that I had felt anger. It was the shame for feeling angry. And I spoke about this to a friend of mine last week. She had snapped at her son too. They're actually the same age. He's a few months older. And she snapped at him too. And that was in the morning before, the drop off. And she said that she felt the whole work day just feeling awful. And she just wanted to leave work early and go and pick him up and just, apologize and tell him that she loved him and all of these things. And she basically just felt awful. And the thing that got to us both when we were reflecting on how we feel when we feel anger and all the rest of it is that how loving children are. Yes, they'll have a tantrum and they'll be angry, but they still come back. They still want hugs. They still want connection. And that really just made the guilt even worse. This feeling of, I feel like such a bad mum. I shouted at my kid. I overreacted. I was angry. And he kind of just forgave me. And I think that anger is such a complex emotion because it's not necessarily always what you think it is. But I think that anger is even more complex because women aren't supposed to get angry and mums are absolutely not supposed to get angry. It's an emotion that mums are really not allowed to have. It's something that we are trained not to have as young girls and women growing up. Anger is something that's more like for men, for boys. I come from a Jamaican background and it's a very kind of common cultural thing, or was when I was growing up. I can't necessarily say that it's like that now, but it's very hierarchical. You have your elders and you respect your elders and you do as you're told, and displaying anger towards your elders, whether it's your mum or your grandparents, is not allowed. And funnily enough, Jackson and I were visiting my family back in London a couple of weeks ago, and my grandma was there, and she's got dementia and doesn't really know where she is a lot of the time. And for Jackson, I think it was really interesting because I've never seen him talking back in the way that he talked back to my grandma, which is quite interesting. And I remember my mom saying at one point, you shouldn't speak like that because you need to respect your elders. And I said, actually, he doesn't need to just blindly respect his elders. Respect goes in two different directions. And that was a really clear moment for me of, and it's not, my grandma wasn't being disrespectful. She's just got dementia and, says things that don't make sense, especially for a 3-year-old. And that was a really clear moment for me of like, yeah, this is such a different generation now. But certainly as I was growing up, like, if I would be a kind of angry teenager, like it always blew my mind when I would see on television or speak to my friends and they would tell me how they shout back at their parents and throw things. And I'd be thinking like, oh my God, like I just could not. If you're from a Jamaican or I would say even like a Black African background, that is just an absolute no. So I grew up learning that adults could be angry, but if you were a child and you expressed anger, it meant disrespect, and you do not disrespect your elders. Fast forward to now, like I'm 42 years old, I hate people being angry at me, which I think is quite a universal thing. I'm sure that, nobody really likes to know that someone's angry with them. It makes me feel unsafe. And I don't like to feel anger because I was not allowed to display anger growing up. So anger for me was, until very recently, I would say until motherhood really, a very suppressed emotion that I didn't know how to deal with. And I think I did not expect to feel anger as a result of motherhood. It was not on my radar at all. I expected all the good emotions, quote unquote good, because anger is not necessarily bad. I expected all of the love and the joy and the stress and on all of these things, but it really kind of took my breath away how these feelings of anger started to really bubble up once I became a mom. And I think that's because the image that we're sold of motherhood is that, we're supposed to be patient, we're supposed to be gentle, we're supposed to be loving, we're supposed to be selfless. And I do really think that all of those things are true. Like, those are qualities that we kind of admire when we think about motherhood, or we aspire to be or aspire to have when we think about motherhood. Motherhood, in my view, was never linked to losing your temper. And I feel like angry mums get judged. I think that if you're a mom and you display anger, whether you are doing that in public, your child's done something that they shouldn't have done and you display anger, or you display anger in private and you tell someone that people are going to assume that you're a bad parent, that you're a bad mom. And those aren't the same thing. And I think that there's a real fear, actually, of displaying anger or being honest about anger, because we're afraid that we'll get reported to social services and, we don't want that. So I think there's a fear of judgment. I think there's a fear of being misunderstood. I think there's a fear of being assumed to be an abusive parent. And as I say, social services and so on getting involved as well. And I think all of that adds up to this highly unrealistic image of motherhood and day-to-day motherhood, like the Groundhog Day, there's not much interesting happening in this house apart from people like living together and going about their business. Like, it all builds up to something that is very unrealistic, I think, where we think and expect that, we should be, if not happy all the time, then at least neutral. And anything that is anything outside of that is not a good thing for us to be displaying. And it creates an awful lot of pressure to be perfect mums. What's really interesting about anger, the more that I dig into it, and I've been really digging into it over the last 2 years, but over this last year, sort of year, 18 months especially, is that rage and anger is very rarely just rage and anger by itself. There are other things that usually show up before we tip into that. So I like to think of rage or anger as being kind of like a mirror, and you need to look behind the mirror to see what's actually there, like what is going on behind the mirror to make that anger and rage come out. In a similar way to jealousy, we can feel jealous about something, but actually that jealousy has a message, it's got information, and we need to get behind it to figure out, okay, what actually is going on here. So if you're someone who's also experiencing or has experienced rage recently, this might be something that's an interesting exercise for you to also think about. When does that anger show up? For me, the anger shows up when I'm feeling really, really stretched. So I do 80% of the childcare with our son. And that means that I have 2-week stretches very often without a break. And then I have one free weekend in a month for myself. And that can flex sometimes, but that's like the foundational structure of how we've arranged our childcare. So what I'll find usually when I am feeling like I'm tipping into anger is that usually that comes when I'm feeling tired and depleted. So, at the end of the day, when I've been to work, he's been to nursery, we've come home, we've done our afternoon activities if we've got them, or, we've been hanging around the house or whatever, and it's now, we're both tired. He's tired, he's dropped his afternoon nap now, or we're in the process of dropping it. He's tired, I'm tired, and I guess we both are a little bit prone to anger being displayed in that part of the day. But also at the end of that childcare stretch, so, towards the end of that 2 weeks, I'm just done. Like, I love my son to bits, but when you are responsible for a child day in, day out, it is relentless. It is just day in and day out without pause. And so for me, I really notice, like, by the time he's getting ready to go to his dad's, I am really, really ready for that break. We do try to space it out so that, I get those breaks, especially the weekend, regularly enough. But there has been instances where, it's been like over a month, 5 or 6 weeks until I've had a weekend for myself where I can really reset. So that's when I tend to notice that I'm feeling depleted. And also just when I'm touched out, that's something that can also add to my anger as well. What's really interesting for me personally, maybe it's different for you, is that there are some things that don't trigger me at all. So tantrums being one of them, probably being the main one. And I'm really surprised about that because I think before we got to the toddler stage, I would have thought that I could not handle a meltdown, that would probably tip me into anger. Because for me, tantrum, when I hear the word tantrum, it's because the other person is angry and they're not getting what they want and they're displaying their anger. But what's really interesting for me when I look at my son, when he's having a temper tantrum, he can't get something. Or we're in a phase right now where he'll tell me and he'll insist he's finished eating. I throw the food away and then he has a massive meltdown because he wants to eat the food. And then he's opening the bin and looking in the bin and why did you throw my food away? And he'll have really big meltdowns. Or when he wants to do something that is actually just not logically possible. We know toddlers have tantrums because the sky is blue. Those things don't really bother me at all, and I can be an incredibly calm kind of port in the storm, and it doesn't ruffle my feathers at all. And I think it's because it makes sense to me that he's having a tantrum about those things because his toddler brain can't comprehend the reality of what's going on, or he's not quite able to understand consequences yet. And so those things don't bother me at all. The things that really tip me into anger, repetition, that is probably the main thing, which is, if I go back to the story that I shared in the beginning, it was the repetition of, please don't do this. This is dangerous. This is, please don't do it. Please don't do it. Saying things again and again and again. And not only me repeating myself ad infinitum, but my child then consistently, repeatedly doing the opposite of what I'm saying. Defiance, quote unquote, disobedience. Things that I, coming from my background, which is again why it's so important to understand your upbringing and your cultural heritage and everything, those are things that were absolutely not allowed. I was not allowed to be defiant, and I was not allowed to be disobedient. It triggers the heck out of me when Jackson does it. Dangerous behavior because it's dangerous. And, like we've had a couple of close shaves where he has like ridden his scooter into the street despite me telling him not to do it. And, he goes out onto the street from our apartment, and like those things will really anger me. The scooter thing especially, which I think is again why anger is so interesting, because yes, I'm angry that he's doing this dangerous behavior that he knows he's not allowed to do, but it was actually like masking something else, which was fear. And generally just feeling unheard. It's a really interesting feeling to feel like you're speaking and 90% of the things that you say just don't matter, are not heard because his brain just doesn't hear them in the way that I'm saying or telling him something, or he's just got selective hearing. So 90% of the things are not being heard. And then if they're being heard, they're not being followed. Those are the things that absolutely tip me into anger. So as I said before, anger is really interesting because it's like an umbrella emotion or feeling. It's a feeling that masks other emotions, either out of self-protection or just out of, not knowing how to deal with the other feelings that you're feeling. Feelings like betrayal or grief, resentment, injustice, things like that. And it's really interesting for me at the moment because I'm really able to see that for me, my anger is really more along the overwhelm route. It's masking those feelings of, why am I the only adult in this house? Like not being able, it's like my anger is brewed by not having someone else to share the load with, having that feeling that it's just me and, I just need a break in that particular moment. And that's when I'll be like, okay, you need to go in another room, or I need to go in another room, because there is not another responsible adult in this house to kind of, like pick them up, take them to another room, explain what's going on, or distract them, or take them for a walk or whatever. In the best case, when you are living as a couple or, living in community, another adult would see that you're struggling, you're in anger, and give you some space. Because I think for so many of us, what we're feeling when we're feeling those feelings of anger, we need space. And often that can create the opposite with our children. I notice that when I'm really angry, Jackson will want connection. And it makes sense because evolutionarily speaking, it's a survival thing for him. And that's also been proven as well. Like, you've got to think for babies and for young children, you are their survival. You're the most important things in their life. And so when you're angry and they can sense or see your anger, they need the reassurance that they are going to be okay, that they're going to survive. And that can come into direct conflict with when you are feeling overwhelmed, touched out, whatever it is, and you just need space. And that can be really difficult when you're solo parenting, when it's just you in the house, whether that's because you're a single parent or whether, your partner just isn't there for whatever reason. So it's really interesting for me personally to know, like, those are the feelings that my anger is masking, as opposed to feelings of loneliness, grief, resentment, betrayal. And I can see that very clearly because those were the feelings that my anger was masking a lot over the past year to 18 months, coming to the end of my relationship. And then in the aftermath of our breakup, there was a lot of anger. And through a lot of journaling and reflection, I was very able to see, like, yes, I'm angry, but there are reasons why I'm angry. And those reasons were the grief, the betrayal, the injustice, all of those kinds of things. So it's a really helpful exercise to be curious and be curious about what is triggering the anger, when it's being triggered as well, because that will tell you how you can help yourself to recognize when you're more likely to be prone to experiencing anger. So, and it's important to really just, I guess, note that anger, it doesn't always point to what you think it's pointing to. And a good example of that is the defiance and quote unquote disobedience. When Jackson's being particularly defiant, I could very easily take the simple view and just say, I'm really angry because he's not listening to me. No, I'm really angry because he's not listening to me. And that's also what I experienced in my childhood. And that's something that I need to unpack, take to therapy, journal over, whatever. Sometimes anger is grief that is wearing armor and it's protecting you. Sometimes anger is injustice, sometimes it's exhaustion, and sometimes it's a body that's saying, I cannot continue like this anymore. Episode 3, I believe it was a really great episode with Dr. Jenny Turner. She works with women and mums especially. And we spoke about mom rage and anger and postpartum rage and why it happens. And she said something that was really interesting. She said that anger also happens when we are depleted, when we are not nourished, when we're malnourished, when we're not eating properly, when we're not drinking, when we're dehydrated. Anger can also show you that your body requires something. So I'm just interrupting this episode to let you know that I have a free resource that can help you with exactly this topic, because motherhood was never meant to be done alone. And if you've heard that it takes a village, it actually takes 5. So this free resource, The 5 Villages That Every Mum Needs and How to Build Your Own, is an audio guide that will walk you through the 5 different villages that mums need: the starter village, the service village, the safe village, the financial village, and the modern village. Each one of them will help you to see motherhood in a brand new way. It's less about doing it all yourself and more about being supported through it all. If you're the kind of person who loves a beautiful printable mini workbook, there's that for you as well. And best of all, it's all by audio, so you can pop them in your headphones, listen to them as you go about your day, pretty much like you're doing with this podcast. If that sounds like something that you want, it's absolutely free. You can get it via the link in my show notes. And I think also modern motherhood creates anger in and of itself. I think there's a reason why so many of us are feeling this as an emotion, because we are just under so much. It's the whole point of this podcast really, is to talk about the debts that modern motherhood brings us into. We are under a constant amount of mental load, informational overload as well. Like, we have never been so fortunate to know so much about how children work and how children's minds work and how children's bodies work. But that means that we are trying our absolute best to raise psychologically balanced children. And that means understanding how their psychology works. And I think at the same time, that means that we are trying to implement lots of tips and tricks and gentle parenting and FAFO parenting and, like speaking in ways that little children can hear and understand and will be likely to follow. That's all work. That's all things that we have to actively, consciously and intentionally do, as opposed to just reacting and just having a conversation like how you would have a conversation with an adult. We have to really think about how we compose sentences and give information to our children. And we're doing all of that often in very trying situations, like tantrums and meltdowns, where we are being triggered at the same time. And it's like we're trying to recall and remember all this information that we've seen online or read in books or heard on podcasts or whatever it might be, while we are being mentally activated from things that happened in our own childhood that are most likely unprocessed. It's so much information and our brains are just overloaded. Comparison and social media can also create anger because we can look and see that someone else has it apparently so good and so easy, and their kid is such a great traveler and just sits with them and does their colouring in and doesn't have meltdowns or, bite them on the arm like my son did on his 10-minute meltdown while we were landing on the way to London. Like, you can look at things that happen on social media and forget that you're seeing a snapshot, you're seeing something that somebody has processed enough to share. Financial pressure, because we know that, finances are pressured after having children for a lot of us, and finances means survival. That's something that can also create a lot of anger, but also just that never really fully recovering. Constant stimulation and not having a village. I don't necessarily think it's that we've become angrier. I think it's more that we're becoming more overloaded. I think that modern motherhood is asking us, or very often asks us, to do things that our grandparents and even our parents didn't have the information to worry about, while doing it without the support that so many of them had. Having said all of this, I do think it's important that children see anger. As I said, I grew up in a household that was very hierarchical. So adults were adults, children were children, and vulnerability is not really something that was kind of shown and shared. And I absolutely get that. We don't want to overshare with our children. Our children are not responsible for our emotions. And, there are things that are just not appropriate for children to know. But I do think that children need to see that we are human and that we have emotions, and anger is just one of many. Because I really think that anger itself is not bad. There is no good or bad emotion. It's really to do with your associations with it, how those emotions are displayed. And, anger is not bad in and of itself. Violence is not good. Manipulation is not good. Making someone feel unsafe is not good. But anger itself can be expressed in healthy ways. And just because you're angry with someone doesn't mean you don't love them. You can be angry with your mom, with your dad, with your sister, with your best friend, but still care about them. And I think that children need to learn this early. Children need to learn that it's okay to feel anger, and it's okay for someone to be angry at you in the right context, with no violence, manipulation, etc. And that you're not going to lose them as a result. It doesn't mean that they're not loved or that you don't love them. Children don't need perfection. They need repair. And I think that when we can teach our children how to repair, it's just as important as teaching our children to be kind. Good, healthy friendships that last over time, they survive rupture. Relationships survive rupture. I think there's a misconception that a relationship can only be a good relationship if you don't argue. I think that's impossible. I think you've got two human beings who operate in their own ways, and conflict is inevitably going to happen. It's not about whether you argue or not. It's about whether you can repair and whether you can recover from it. When we can do that, then it shows that we can trust each other. It builds trust. We're not just showing our best sides in the hope that people are going to like and accept us. We know that we can be accepted and loved for who we are. And that is something that is so important for children, but also for adults. And I think that's something that so many of us are kind of a bit late to the party about, especially in terms of romantic relationships, because, you know, we have been told that we just want happiness, and we can have happiness, but that doesn't mean that you can't be angry with someone at the same time, you know. And I think for our children, we are already superheroes for them, you know, like we can make them feel better when they're not feeling well, you know, if they cut themselves, we can give them a kiss and magically it feels better. We are able to do things that seem magical for them. But one day they are going to realize that we are human. I think we've all experienced that moment or that phase when we've looked at our own parents and realized they're only people. And our children are going to recognize that about us too. And I feel like it should not be a disappointing thing. I wasn't disappointed when I learned that. I felt a huge amount of compassion for my mum when I realized that. And I think that that's, in the best case, how we want our children to feel when they have that moment of realization. We want them to see that we are human. So it's okay to cry in front of your children. It's okay to feel angry. It's okay to show joy, as long as we are expressing them in healthy ways, because then they realize it's also okay for me to feel angry. It's also okay for me to feel sad, especially for boys. It's okay for them to feel sad. It's okay for them to cry, in the same way that for girls, it's okay for them to feel angry. This is how we can display it. This is how we can move through it. And this is how we then repair. And a really cool thing about repairing is that it requires curiosity. So it's kind of like going full circle. We have the situation, we get triggered, we get angry, we calm down, and before the repair, we have to get curious about why all of that happened. And once we've got that information, things can start to make sense. They might not make sense to everyone. You know, the reasons why you felt angry in that time might not make sense to your partner, but it makes sense to you. And that's something that you can then go off and make sense of with your therapist or whatever. But those questions of, okay, what actually happened? Where did that anger come from? Where did I feel it in my body? That can also be a really important clue. Where did it come from? What do I need? Like, what did I most need in that moment? Was it that I felt like I needed another adult in the house to help share the load? Was it that I felt like I had been touched out all day? Was it that I had prepared this meal and then my husband came home late and didn't even bother to say thank you for it? Like, what was the thing that tipped you into anger? And also questioning, where have I experienced this feeling before? From another relationship, in my childhood, at work? Because very often that anger that came out is not the thing, it was not because of the thing that the child was doing, right? It's because it's touching on something deeper. So we need to get curious about it. And also because we can't really do the repair without knowing what it is that we're repairing. In the same way that just saying sorry to someone is not really an apology. Like, what are you apologizing for? And then what's going to happen moving forwards? So in our case, that means that once we've both calmed down, because it doesn't help to do this in the moment either, because, you know, both angry, but in the moment when we have both calmed down, I will bring Jay to me, or I'll go to him, get on his level, we'll look at each other, and I will say, I'm sorry that I shouted at you, whatever the thing is. I'm sorry that I shouted at you. I was scared that you were going to fall in the water with your scooter. I'm sorry that I shouted at you. I was frustrated because X, Y, and Z. It was not your fault. Very important to say. And it really just like, it warms my heart so much to see his reaction, to hear me say, I'm sorry. Even if he doesn't really understand the whole context, like, it means so much to him. The repair means so much to him. And he will come and say he's sorry to me as well when he's done something that's been, that's led to anger, he will often say as well, I'm sorry for not listening, or whatever it will be. And this is, we cannot say we're sorry. We cannot apologize for something if we don't know what we're apologizing for. Now, you may have been well within your rights to take the scooter away, to remove the dangerous thing, to whatever it was. It doesn't mean that you're not going to do that again. It just means that the way you go about it, hopefully next time, will be different. And, we'll hug, we'll make up, and then we'll do something fun, whether it's just like put on some music and dance around to it, or shake a bit, or whatever. We'll move past it, and he will go about the rest of his day. And he will often repeat it in the evening as well at bedtime, or even the next day or the day after. He'll repeat what happened, and almost like his brain is processing it. Like, I did this, and then you got angry and you shouted, and then you said you were sorry, and then, because he's learning, like he's processing this information and he's learning it. And I think we can't underestimate what that means for little children. And hopefully that means that we are growing our children and sending our children out into the world to be more emotionally intelligent, to be able to argue and, have disagreements with people, but also to be able to repair. And because they're seeing the full spectrum of emotions, nothing is taboo for them. They are allowed to feel their emotions. They'll know that their emotions are valid. There'll be kids and adults who are able to read a room and able to be compassionate and able to be kind. So, I think that it's really important, as a recap, to remember that if you are feeling like you're in the grips of anger and rage a lot at the moment, you're not a bad mum. I actually think you're potentially doing something really good for your child, as long as it's being done in a healthy, constructive and non-destructive way. Because your anger doesn't come from nowhere. It is maybe grief, maybe it's injustice, maybe it's overwhelm, maybe it's exhaustion. What is your anger trying to tell you? Showing your child that anger is a thing, and that you can repair it, and that you can actually even be stronger together afterwards. We can apologize, and that we're not going to leave them because they spilt their milk on the floor and we got angry about it. Like, we're adults, we're parents who are going to stay, where we have a relationship that can survive this difficult moment of anger. And I really do think that is one of the biggest gifts that we can give to our kids. It's not about being perfect and never being angry. It's about being a full spectrum human being and showing our humanity. I also just want to say that we speak about things like this a lot in my WhatsApp group. It's a lot. This is a place where we come and we share for 10 minutes every week, deepest, darkest thoughts, where we are not allowed to judge. There's no criticism allowed. There's no judgment allowed. It's literally a space where we can show up, say anything, and feel held. It's a small group. So if this is something that sounds really interesting to you, then you can find all the information in the show notes. The first month is free. We would love to have you in there. Thank you so much for being here with me. If you got something out of this episode, then please take a moment, press the stars, leave me a review, hit follow if you haven't already, and please do share this with as many moms as you can so that we can spread the message that it is okay to feel anger and rage. And I will see you back here for the next episode.